One of the most important works in all of contemporary Judaism could very well be considered to be the mimer, the discourse of Ve'Atah Tetzaveh. It was given over by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, one of the most important figures in all of modern Jewish history, and to some extent Jewish history at large, majorly helping define what religious Judaism is in the United States and across the world today, and heading many organizations which are at the forefront of spreading towards and reaching Jews all over the world. This discourse is a pretty famous work tying together several fundamentally important concepts in Judaism and tying together ideas and thoughts from the Torah, Talmud, Kabbalah, and Chassidus into a pretty fascinating discourse. In addition, it was a work he had distributed in 1992, just before his passing, the last of such works, leaving it as something of particular focus and study, as it was, in a sense, the last thing he ever gave out. So here's a brief summary of the entire thing. It begins with a quote from the Torah, particularly the middle of the book of Exodus, in the first verse of the portion of Tetzaveh. It says, in regards to commending the temple priests, particularly Aaron and his sons, with the lighting of the candles in the temple, it says, as God commands Moshe, "And you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take for you pure olive oil crushed for the luminary to kindle a constant flame." So, right away there are about 4 questions on this verse that are asked. Firstly, why does it say, "and you shall command"? It's a bit of an odd turn of phrase, as why would it imply that Moshe was commanding the Jewish people? He's not commanding anybody. He's being an intermediary for God's command. Normally, throughout the Torah, whenever Moshe is told to command, it uses a slightly different terminology. So why here is it different? Secondly, it says that the Israelites should bring to you the olive oil, referring to Moshe, which is also pretty odd, as it should be sent to Aaron. So why does the Torah say that it should be sent to Moshe? Which is yet another odd choice of words. Thirdly, it says to get oil crushed for the luminary, even though a more grammatically correct statement would seemingly be to get oil crushed to illuminate. And lastly, fourthly, it says that it should be as an eternal flame. But in literally the very next verse, it says that it should burn from evening until morning. So clearly there's a lot that needs to be explained with this one verse, and this will be used as an introduction to discuss much more practical concepts. So, to begin with, some answers. There's a famous concept that the word tetzaveh used, which means to command, relates with and is considered connected to the word tzavsa, which means to connect. So this particular use of tetzaveh, which relates to the word of connection, emphasizes the concept of what the idea of what Moshe was and what he did, which is to connect the Jewish people to God through himself as an intermediary of sorts. However, Moshe is often compared to the head of the Jewish people as the legs. This represents how Moshe is the leader of the Jewish people, and they need him. However, similar to how a body needs a head also needs a body. So Moshe himself needs the Jewish people too. So this connection that they have goes both ways, and this actually answers the first 2 questions, why the use of the word tetzaveh, and also why to Moshe, as that's the nature of the role of Moshe, the leader of the Jewish people, to help connect the Jews to a higher level, to God, something which would be difficult for them to do on their own. This relates to the concept that Moshe is referred to as a shepherd of faith, as in his role as the leader of the Jewish people, he can help bring them to a higher level by bringing out the built-in faith in God that every Jewish person has. This is a more Kabbalistic, Hasidic kind of concept discussed and explained a lot more in the Tanya, which is a pretty other fundamental Jewish text, which brings up the point that every Jewish person has an inherent faith and belief in God. It's just not always so revealed, as it has what to do with the makeup of their soul. It's a whole thing. I have a video on the Tanya, so check that out if you want more of an explanation. Elsewise, yeah. So even though this exists, not necessarily always, revealed. So it's the role of the leader of the Jewish people to be a figure who can make this facet internalized and felt. And in fact, that's kind of largely the concept of a leader, somebody who people can turn to and look up to and help guide people to become better versions of themselves through setting an example or by helping people individually or things along those lines. And that doesn't just apply to Moshe, as Moshe wasn't the only leader of the Jewish people. In fact, in every generation, there's a leader of the Jewish people. The other example given is that of Mordechai from the Purim story, who led the Jewish people through the Persian exile after the destruction of the First Temple, and helped fight against the machinations of Haman, successfully keeping the Jewish people safe and faithful. So as his role as the leader of the Jewish people, or the Moshe of his generation as it's called, he would speak to and strengthen the Jewish people in spite of the dangerous time, of course, and be an inspirational figure to help keep the Jews strong and doing the right thing. In fact, this whole Purim thing with Mordechai and Esther and Haman and whatnot could seem like a fairly minor holiday, but it's actually of paramount importance. This is because it's the day when the Jewish people are considered to have fully accepted the Torah, which is a bit odd, as you'd think that would be by Mount Sinai, but there's actually a point in the Talmud where it says that by Mount Sinai, God actually lifted up the mountain and held it over the Jewish people as a threat of sorts. So while they did accept the Torah there and then, it could be considered to not be a full and proper acceptance, as it was done under a threat of sorts. And that's how things went up until the point of Purim, wherein all the Jewish people were threatened with death just for being Jewish, not for the last time. However, in spite of this, they all unanimously chose to retain their Judaism and keep the Torah, with the help of Mordechai, of course. So it says in the book of Esther, the Megillah, which is read every Purim towards the end, that they had accepted what they had already accepted, meaning that it was here that they finally and fully accepted the Torah, choosing of their own free will to keep the Torah and maintain their Judaism in spite of the threat of death. This explains the concept of crushed for the luminary, as the oppression, threats, and suffering that the Jews dealt with is referred to as being crushed for the luminary, but as shepherded through with the assistance of the Moshe, Mordechai, or others in the future. The example of Purim is given particularly over, say, Hanukkah, as here it was of every single Jewish person that was under threat, and yet still, in that moment, chose to give up their lives rather than forsake their religion, a choice which has been made by Jewish people time and time again for generations. This, however, was a difficult thing and could only really be done through the Jewish people at large connecting with their spiritual leader, in this case, Mordechai. Beyond this, however, is a more practical concept. It's one thing entirely that if someone threatens you to give up your religion under threat of death to make that choice, and yet more difficult than that somehow it can be to choose to do the right thing not under any threats whatsoever, simply out of your own free will. In fact, in more recent memory, there are people who say would risk or give up their lives to keep their religion when living under the dictatorial Soviet Union, and when they eventually made it to the United States in safety, suddenly had a much more difficult time maintaining the practice of their faith. apparently it's easier in a sense to do the religion when there's pressure and depression than when you have to choose to do it on your own. In addition, with the concept of Mashiach, the Messiah, when times are difficult, everyone suddenly turns to God and prays for salvation, which is good, but when things are easy and nice and times are simple and there aren't any real issues, suddenly Mashiach isn't something which is so desired or thought about by most people. It becomes like a faraway dream, a non-practical reality, which would be nice, but things are good as they are too right now, so maybe not so strictly necessary. And this is largely the point of all this, the point that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is getting at, also answering the fourth question, as an eternal flame is representative of a constant desire and effort towards doing better, as opposed to just a temporary desire during bad times represented by a temporary time from evening until morning. In spite of the fact that nowadays times are good and easy and things aren't as difficult as they used to be, it's still strictly necessary for every person to still constantly desire a better world. And while this could be difficult for a lot of people, it can be done by connecting to someone higher than you, because it's so necessary to make the world a better place with the coming of Mashiach, and doing better and more good deeds to facilitate that in spite of the ease and simplicity of the world now, because although the world is good, it's not perfect. Not as good as it could be, and it's our job to make that the case. So that's a rough summary of the entire thing, albeit a bit oversimplified. It's a bit different from my usual context, so that's that. But besides, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.